Good morning. Do you have a helmet and spear? Anybody? A helmet and spear? I should use this. Hello. Yes, 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 yes. Do any of you have a helmet and spear? Preferably with breastplate armor, that especially shows off cleavage if you haven't. You left it at home. You know the image of the Valkyrie, who's, of course, this is their music. Right? When I was a kid, it was kill the wabbit, kill the wabbit. Because I learned this music on Bugs Bunny. That's a little bit different, I suppose. But everyone knows this music, yes? Especially if you saw Apocalypse Now, I suppose. It was the music the Colonel had the helicopters playing as they were strafing the village. That did fight back. That was, it did fight back. But where's this music from? Anybody know? Yes, Germany. Richard Wagner. So it's from an opera called Die Valkyrie, which was the second opera in a ring cycle. It starts off with Das Rheingold, then Die Valkyrie, then Siegfried, and last Die Götterdämmerung, or the Twilight of the Gods. And you could actually, if you look up the Met. My laptop seems to have a real case of the slows this morning. I don't know. Everything takes. So, as you can see, there are lots of performances that are on the web that you can go and look at, where you'll actually get to see this iconic image of the chorus of Valkyries. They're all Wotan's daughters that he had with Erda, or Earth. And this is the actual prelude or beginning of Act 3, where the Valkyries are all arriving. That's an interesting portrayal of the dead bodies, I guess, of the. Those are people all hanging together, nearly nude. I don't know if that strikes you as entertaining. I haven't actually seen this version before, so that's kind of interesting. Beware, some European countries have very different ideas of what's permissible than we do. They look naked, don't they? Do I need to give everyone a trigger warning? Too late now, I guess. Where are my Valkyries? Here they come. Does that say Schultheiss on the back? What did she have on that? So Wagner's Ring, which is a not only a ring of operas, but also about a powerful ring, a ring of power. So it has a lot of things in common with the Lord of the Rings, if you're familiar with that small movie series. It's continuing to grow under the Hobbit. But so in Das Rheingold, the gold in the Rhine, and Rhine means clean or pure, and the gnome or dwarf or Jew, if you interpret it that way, Alberich, comes and finds these Rhine maidens all swimming in the Rhine, and they're very sexy, usually done in a way to make them look sexy. And of course he falls instantly in lust, I don't know if we'd call it love, with them. Of course they laugh at him, he's ugly, like me probably, right? And then he, in his anger with them, he also spots this golden light that's coming from the Rhine, and it's the Rhine gold, right? The sacred gold that's basically the life of the Rhine, right? And so he inquires about it, and they say, oh, no one can ever have that unless they vow that they'll never fall in love, right? They give up love. And he's like, wow, he's going to give up love because, of course, they rejected him. So he steals the gold and makes a magical ring out of it. He also makes a magical helmet that enables him to appear however he wants, a little frog, a dragon, whatever. And he makes his people, the Nibelungens, those that live under the ground, right, mine, and they find more gold, so he has a heap of gold. Meanwhile, Wotan and his gods have just had giants build Valhall, which is their new palace or castle, where they're going to live and reign over the world. And the price of building this castle that Wotan promised on his spear shaft, on the spear, carved, etched is the contract, that he will pay the giants by giving them Freya, who is one of the goddesses. And in fact, she's the one that takes care of the apples, the golden apples, and the golden apples are what give the gods their immortal life. So that's a bad idea, right? Plus, you don't give up one of your own like that. So none of the gods believe he's really going to give her up, but the giants insist, so he does. He has to. So the giants walk off with Freya. And the question then is, well, how do you get her back? And Loga, or fire, which is also kind of like logic, that's kind of interesting. He's also the smart, wily one, and he figures out, well, let's go down. I've heard that there's this dwarf with a pile of gold. Let's go down there, steal his gold, and then use that to pay to get Freya back. So Wotan thinks that's a great idea. So off they go. So of course they have no real problem tricking Alberich into being a frog to prove that he could do anything. And they step on him and take his ring and capture him and take the gold and come back, and they buy Freya back from the giants. But meanwhile, Wotan has put this ring on his finger, and Alberich has cursed it. And so the end result of this is that Wotan and the gods have had it. That curse is going to destroy them. And first off, the ring has to go to the giants. The giants are cursed now because they have the ring, and the one brother kills the other, and then turns himself into a dragon and hides in a cave to guard the hoard, the golden hoard. Well, Wotan is absolutely addicted to this ring and needs to get it back, and decides to have a child, because he can't steal it back, so he decides to have a son who will go and kill the dragon and get the gold back. And that would be Sigmund, or Victory Mouth. I don't know why. But in any case, Sigmund has a twin sister, which is a neat word in German. It's a Schwellingspaar, which is kind of a neat idea, right? In any case, Sieglinde is Sigmund's sister. They end up having a child named Siegfried, which is free victory, right? But you might also remember it's also one of Hitler's main battle lines, the Siegfried line, right? In any case, the problem that Hera points out, or Fricka rather, Wotan's wife, it's the same kind of gods as the Greeks, but it's actually, of course, the Germanic ones. But Fricka points out that you can't have Sigmund kill the giant, because after all, you gave him the sword, Notung, plus you're his father, etc. So if he kills the dragon, it's pretty clear it's really Wotan that's doing it. So Wotan has to give up and in fact ends up having Sigmund killed in great despair, etc. By the way. And by the way, one of the chief Valkyries, Brunhild, the most famous one, tries to protect Sigmund against Wotan, so that gets her into problems with Wotan, who has to punish her, so he surrounds her with fire and he takes her power away. And the fire is going to keep everyone except the most bravest warrior from rescuing her. Well, of course, that turns out to be Siegfried, who is the one then who grows up, rebuilds Notung, the sword, and goes and kills the dragon, gets the ring, gets the helmet, comes back and rescues Brunhild, who gives him all her wisdom, which doesn't seem to work very well, because he proceeds to head off to the grandson, or the son, rather, of the gnome, Alberich, who ends up eventually killing Siegfried and trying to get the ring back. Doesn't work, etc. Brunhild has a funeral pyre where she jumps into the funeral pyre famously. And by the way, Hitler, shortly after his marriage to Eva Braun, had his guards build a gasoline fire up above the bunker where he and Eva, now dead bodies, were burned to a crisp in memory of Siegfried's funeral pyre. So so there's a lot of interesting connections. Hitler was very fond of this opera cycle. Not only did the gnomes or the dwarves clearly represent Jews as far as they were concerned, but also the heroic nature of Siegfried and the dawning of the twilight of the gods, basically, is the dawning then of the human era. Very much the same as the Lord of the Rings story. So the gods are destroyed. And so was Hitler. So what's the connection? Well, today we're going to talk about Schopenhauer. I don't know what I did with my page on Schopenhauer, but... But Schopenhauer, I remember when I studied him in 18th century thought in college, I despised him. He was terrible for multiple reasons. I didn't really understand why, but he was quite a throwback. He goes back to Kant. His contemporaries were all reacting to Hegel. And in fact, Schopenhauer was a graduate student under the auspices of Hegel at one point, and his thesis was against Hegel's philosophy, and yet Hegel approved it. And famously then Schopenhauer started teaching in Berlin and promised that within 2 years Hegel would have no more students. But famously, instead of Hegel having no more students in 2 years, Schopenhauer had no students, and Hegel was absolutely popular. There was a comic that was passed around on Facebook just recently, this last week. I'm not sure that I'd be able to find it, but it was posted by a German, and the picture showed two individuals sitting at a conference table with microphones. And the one was duped to be Hegel, and the other one, photoshopped to be Schopenhauer. And what was funny about the picture was that Hegel had about 20 mics in front of him, and Schopenhauer had none. So in order to get the joke, you have to know that, because there was nothing written, right? So you had to know the images. You had to know that's Hegel and that's Schopenhauer, and the fun, of course, that everyone was interested in Hegel and no one was interested in Schopenhauer. And why was that? Schopenhauer was not very popular. He ended up resigning and went to Fairbanks. He did move around a little bit. By the way, even his mother didn't like him. His sister was kind of okay with him, but not really okay with him, because he was I mentioned that there's kind of a synonymity between philosopher and asshole, right? Well, he was clearly one of those extreme assholes. As far as I know, the only one that loved him was his dog. What did I do here? Schopenhauer. Which, that's a real painting of him as far as I know, with his dog. And that goes to show that, a lot of people think that people and their pets start to look a lot like one another. And I think that's one of the sets of images that give people that impression. I don't know. There's another iconic picture of the two of them standing looking away from the image. So it's more their silhouette, and it's kind of interesting that the silhouettes even look similar in that picture. But you have to admit, well, at least dogs loved him, so that's kind of significant. And he lived till his 80s. Unfortunately, Hegel died when he was only 62. But I mentioned Kant, and Hegel is a reaction to Kant, his whole generation was, and Kant sets a stage for the Enlightenment and the post-Enlightenment. And can you hear me over the Valkyries? No, I should shut them off. It is meant to be really kind of, well, not is that, kind of, sorry. So it's of course a highlight in those German operas. There's several others that I might get to play if time goes very slowly today. That clock seems totally wrong. It's 10:17. Oh, okay, that's right. We start at 10. I know that. Okay, so Kant, and we haven't talked about Kant. We will have at least 2 classes on Kant. But basically, Kant is a response to Hume. Hume, of course, had left us with, it's kind of hard, where do you start with this? You have to keep track of the entire process, right? But Hume had been the extreme example of the empiricist. If, the only thing you know for sure is what you're experiencing at the moment, then we can't really know all sorts of things. So science basically says, okay, so we just have hypotheses. We can't really know for sure. But the problem for Hume is we can't actually see outside of ourselves. We're trapped in our own minds, basically. And Kant finds no way out of this and agrees, but at the same time says there's still grounds to say that we know stuff because metaphysics can be rescued. And how does Kant rescue metaphysics? By his transcendental method. And the transcendental method is basically to say, and I'll quick throw in, this is more of a Buddhist joke, but if you're having dental surgery or something, you can transcend dental medication, if you like. But then, of course, it'll be more painful. Transcendental medication. You've heard of transcendental meditation, right? But that's not what Kant does. He transcends this limitation by saying, well, okay, so we can't know for sure anything apart from what we're experiencing, but we do experience structure, the rational. That's something that we experience. So where does it come from? And for Kant, he doesn't really explain where it comes from, but he can transcend the phenomena by saying what must be the case in order for us to have phenomena in the first place. And so he gives us this set of things like we experience everything in time. We experience physical things or dimensional things as things that have space, right? Dimensions, right? Plus, everything that human beings experience is either in a unity, everything is a unity, or a plurality. In fact, it's both, right? Everything is. Well, this harkens back to Aristotle's categories, the basic categories of substance, right? The difference is that for Aristotle, those categories applied to things, and everything had these characteristics. But for Kant, because he's trapped by Hume's dilemma, argues that all of those categories are not categories of the things themselves, but are instead the categories that our minds impose on our perceptions. Right? And by the way, this has been completely accepted. You might want to argue with it, but basically we today accept this Kantian position, which comes from, we figure he was in the 1780s writing this. So we're looking at 1782 was one critique, 1786 was another, I think, and 88 was still another. And these critiques are the main books where this Kantian point of view comes from, right? And so the reason that the world is structured for us is not because the world is structured. Of course it has structure, but the thing is, of course, we can't know it, right? So how do we know structure? Well, it's the way the human mind organizes its experience, right? Now that's, again, completely accepted today. We're completely convinced that the way the world seems to us is because, of course, the way the human being perceives, right? We have certain kinds of eyes that enable us to see within a certain color range, and our hearing, right? So this is something that's completely acceptable. Of course, we have tools that have enabled us to go beyond our senses, etc. But so Kant gives us this dilemma. It's still a dilemma. He's fixed Hume. Has he answered the problem that Hume sets? And of course, people will argue both directions on that. But as far as he's concerned, the main thing was discovering the metaphysics, getting back to the metaphysics, right? How the structure appears to us, right? But he doesn't really answer how it actually does that. The way the structure works, yes, but why we have it, that's a big question. and inspires, I would argue, psychology. Psychology is basically an attempt to answer why we have this perception of structure, right? Another attempt is to answer by saying that it comes from our stories, it comes from our, we are homo neurons. We experience everything in stories. And the stories structure our experience, right? So that's where that comes from. It's also pretty clear that not everybody experiences rationality the same way. Kant apparently didn't recognize that. There are certain biological characteristics. So the psychiatrists and psychologists that look at how the gestalt appears to us, right? I remember when I was a graduate, I guess I was still a graduate student, and I applied to seminary, and it was the Episcopal Church, so they wanted to make sure I wasn't crazy. So they sent me to Hahnemann Hospital in Philadelphia to be interviewed by a psychiatrist to see if I was crazy or not. And he gave me the Rorschach test. Have you ever heard of that? Yes? So that's when you're basically presented with a series of bilaterally symmetrical ink blots, and you're asked to say what you see. And of course, you can't just say that's a bilaterally symmetrical ink blot. You have to see something, and based on your reaction, somehow the psychiatrist is supposed to identify whether you're crazy or normal, whatever that is, right? Reminds me of kill all normies, whatever that is. I hope I'm normal. I know I'm not, but I've always wanted to be normal, or mediocre at least. It was a goal. In any case, I passed the test. Oddly, they thought I was normal, and that was because I knew how to play the game. So when I saw the ink blot, that I could clearly see me stabbing my mother to death. I didn't say that. I said it was something like Mr. Spock giving the V sign or whatever. No, that was a joke. Horrible. Watch movies, today, and everybody's getting stabbed, and I got to watch the movie 13 Hours the other day, and that was just everybody killing everyone. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not. And then the day before that, I saw the Super Bowl, which is everybody killing everyone, except they've got pads, so they live through it. That's kind of, one of the teams won, by the way. Any of you see the Super Bowl? No. I had 1 beer and 10 Doritos. So I felt a secure bond with all other American males, during the thing. Okay, that's fun. Okay, so Kant gives us this dilemma. We cannot actually see the thing in itself, the way the world really is, because everything we experience is through the filtering system of our human perception, which hopefully is rational, whatever that is. Schopenhauer argued that we could actually see the thing in itself, and what it was the will. Whatever, right? The will. What will? Well, the will of nature, perhaps. And basically what this will was kind of a conscious effort on the part of nature to screw us over. So whatever the best laid plans of mice and men are, they will oft gang agley, right? They'll often go astray, right? Because nature wants to, I almost said the F word, screw us over, right? So we age, we die. You have plans. You plan to put your bottle on the counter, and it falls off, you know. I mean, there's, you turn on your car, you go down the driveway and end up in the ditch across the road. I mean, it's just nature constantly messing with you, right? It seems like it's going to be easy for you to do something, and then when you actually try to do it, it's incredibly hard for some reason, right? How often does that happen? By the way, I would argue that today we would look at that and say that that's entropy again, right? There's entropy again screwing us over, right? It's a constant battle between those organizing forces in the universe and those that want to break the organization apart. Very interesting. By the way, I did discover why I disliked him and why even his mother disliked him, and one reason for that was I read the book by Rudy Safransky. Notice Safransky has written books on Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Goethe, and, who am I forgetting? There's another one. Safransky. He's on YouTube too, by the way, so you could listen to him. Aber spricht nur Deutsch, as far as I've heard. So Goethe, Schiller, Romantics. Schiller as a philosopher, these are all awards he's won, etc. And Heidegger. Heidegger's the other philosopher he's done. I've actually read all four of them, and they're very good biographies. And so in reading the biography by Safransky, Rudy, of Schopenhauer, I learned the reason he was such an asshole, that even his mother hated him. His father was one of the richest men in Europe at the time, a merchant who had interests all over Europe, including London, Paris, etc. As a child, his father had him live for a year in Paris with some friends, which he grew up and loved them as another family, and also learned to speak French. They also had another year where his father had him live in London, and so he grew up there for a year, loved that family, and learned English, and he got to travel all over as his father traveled to all different places. He got to travel and learn all these different languages, so he had all this benefit of his wealth. And eventually, then his father, of course, wanted him to study business, eventually become an intern, a peon in their own company. But he hated that. He didn't want to do that. And so he said no, and he wanted to go back to school, and he wanted to study philosophy. And of course, then he studies with Hegel, and Hegel was a different kind of asshole because he was all academic and didn't have a whole lot of life experience like Schopenhauer did. So that's where that conflict was. And so he disliked Hegel and his thinking that he had a complex system of philosophy that basically would explain everything, which I think it does, actually. And Schopenhauer hated that and decided to criticize it. But then his response, as I said, was to say that the thing in itself out there is the will, and basically it's just going to screw us over. And he ended up living a life that was pretty screwed over, and stayed in a nice house on Frankfurt am Main, which was very new at the time, so it was very posh, nice new condominium kind of apartment with his poodle. He would spend his afternoons having lunch with friends in the restaurants, his favorite restaurants, and he'd spend his day reading and writing his same book over and over again. But that inspired Wagner. And when we look at Wagner's operas, the Ring opera especially, but not just that one, Wagner was very much influenced by Schopenhauer, dedicated the manuscript of the Ring operas to Schopenhauer, and Schopenhauer never said thank you. Eventually, Wagner's wife Cosima got the text back from Schopenhauer, and it was full of markings saying how horrible everything was. So she thought it was a good thing that Wagner never got to see what Schopenhauer thought of it, because Schopenhauer was kind of Wagner's philosophical hero. By the way, Wagner not only is a writer of operas and other types of music, but is also thought of as a philosopher in his own right, writing about music and art and so on. In any case, that is another reason I hate Schopenhauer, and that, well, I shouldn't say hate, but despise, because he was so horrible to, when someone dedicates a work to you because of the inspiration you've given them, you don't respond that way. That's just terrible, right? But so how does that reflect itself in Wagner's work? Well, by the way, one source for this is Schopenhauer is the first European philosopher, as far as I know, that is heavily influenced by Buddhism. So he's aware of the Buddhist philosophy coming into Europe. There's a lot of interest, by the way, in art, in Asian things. In any case, so he's aware of Buddhism, and so you can think of the will, I think, in his philosophy is sort of like karma. How the Buddhists, if you're familiar with the Buddhist philosophy, Buddha had attempted to experience all of the different religions to find the right one. This is in the axial age, so about the same time as Socrates and Confucius. And so the Buddha tried out all the different religions, mostly of course the Hindu gods, came to conclude that none of them were true, and sitting under the Bodhi tree became enlightened of this. And then we have Buddhism begin. By the way, he's also known as Siddhartha, if you're familiar with that name. And he concludes that the only way out of this horrible dilemma of life is to gradually remove our attachment to physical things, so that once the soul has the chance to be separated from the physical world at the death of the body, we're released into nothingness. So nirvana, in that sense, is nothingness, non-attachment to the physical world. And that's the only way the Buddha argues that we can be released from torture and misery, because all attachment to the physical world is full of corruption, pain, misery, etc. But that also means giving up all the good things too. So the Eightfold Path is a way of disengaging yourself completely from attachment to the physical world, right? By the way, Buddhism in its 1960s importation into the United States, especially through a lot of the books, I can't remember the author's name now, but he wrote a lot of the books and gave us a lot of the vocabulary that a lot of my generation picked up because it annoyed the heck out of our parents. Started talking about Dharma, Nirvana, and so on. All of that, was kind of ameliorated by the idea that by being Buddhist you could relax and enjoy life better, which is totally wrong. That's not what Buddhism is for, actually. But so there's a lot of folks that get into Asian practices thinking that it would help relieve stress and things of that sort. But of course and it does, of course, any of those meditative practices would do that. But basically, Buddhism strikes me as a very pessimistic outlook. And Schopenhauer is considered to be the pessimist. And if you enjoyed, I should apologize. Did you all have a chance to read the couple of pages in the text, the selection by Schopenhauer? Basically says life sucks. There's no meaning in life. Life, is a whatever you want to call it, and then you die, right? So it's very pessimistic. Even just within a couple of pages, you can see that. There's no meaning in life. We could take that back to Hegel, where Hegel basically gives us this evolutionary process. He doesn't call it that. He calls it a dialectic. It comes from the Greek Heraclitus, but for Hegel, there's this dialectical process. You have the thesis, which is the current situation. It automatically draws the antithesis. Even in such a simple thing as you first arrive maybe from walking and you're a little tired and you sit in a nice comfortable chair, but in 20 minutes or less the chair is uncomfortable, right? So every situation draws its opposite, so to speak, right? And as a result of that conflict between the thesis and the antithesis, it moves the state of nature to the next synthesis, right? And that synthesis is now the new thesis that again draws another antithesis, which then moves to a new synthesis, right? So you have this constant process, which becomes viewed as an organic process, while for Sir Isaac Newton, we have the image of the mechanical clock, along with Descartes, the mechanistic time, a mechanistic world, right? Everything is something that science can break down and then put back together, and then you understand the whole, right? With Hegel, everything is organic in the sense of the oak tree, right? So the metaphor for the post-Hegelian point of view is the oak tree, the idea that we start off as an acorn, become a sapling, et cetera, and then an old rotten tree that falls down and then is the source of new life for other things, right? So there's a very different model where it's very difficult for us to know exactly at what point the oak tree is an oak tree and not an acorn anymore, or sap, right? There's blends constantly, so that's very different than that's clearly a gear and this is a gear and this gear goes, right? Instead, the organic picture makes it very difficult to apply concepts to things where it's very clear that we have think, for example, the arguments over race, right? On the one hand, we have the biologist telling us, and it seems absolutely true, that there's only one human race. We don't have separate races. And if by the definition of what makes a race is that we can mate with one another, obviously there is only one human race, right? Otherwise we wouldn't have America, basically. But if you think at the same time the arguments, there are races and that certain people are prejudiced against because of their race, well, that's true too. At the same, it'd be ridiculous to say no. I think of when Dinesh D'Souza wrote his second book years ago called The End of Racism. I was exuberant reading it because, yes, racism is over. Of course, I had never quite felt like I experienced racism myself because I grew up in a society that was all like me. There was no one, that wasn't like me. I was competing against other people that were like me. So it wasn't until I was in the Army where I was really in with a mixed group of people that came from lots of different backgrounds. And I realized that people were saying, "You're a racist." And I'm like, "What? Never heard of it." And they tried to convince me that I was. And I said, "No, I'm a classist. I believe in, class distinctions, that makes sense to me. And that's, I think, a stronger category. The reason, if you talk the way I talk, I like you. I don't care what you look like. As C.S. Lewis says, I like those who like what I like, right? We like the same music. I have a bond. You watch the Super Bowl, yes, we're together. Even if you vote for the wrong team, which I don't know which team you thought was the wrong team. So categories are very difficult to identify from the organic model. And it makes sense to have lots of different tools, lots of different categories, all of which are true. It makes sense to say, yes, it's true that there's only one human race. But it also makes sense to say, yes, there are racial distinctions. And you say, well, aren't you being self-contradictory when you say that? It says, well, only if you're not compartmenting the different tools in their separate boxes, right? If you're thinking they're all in one box, well, of course it looks like you're believing two totally opposite things. But if you say, well, this box helps us do this box helps us do this, don't let the apparent contradiction between them give you the impression that you're being an idiot when you believe both, right? Because in a sense, and this is kind of the dominant American theme, right, is that we're pragmatists. We have lots of different tools. We don't get confused by the apparent contradiction between them. In fact, that goes to help us make humor, right? When we think of most jokes are puns, and a pun is equivocation where you're using one word in two or more senses, right? Why do little baby ducks walk softly? Because little baby ducks can't walk hardly. See? So it's a pun, right? And I'm punishing you with, fortunately it doesn't turn into pure pandemonium, but you can get a kick out of various kinds of puns, of course. And what are we doing when we do that? We're mixing two different tools, obviously, two different meanings. We're capable of understanding, and we laugh because we realize what you did, right? Okay. So, Arthur Schopenhauer. Going back to Arthur. Buddhist influence, karma, or the will. For Schopenhauer, it's the will. And how does that get used? Notice the historical importance associated with that. Boy, we get our own trigger warnings now, thanks to YouTube. Notice the title of this famous film. Does that mean Hitler understood what the will was? Keep in mind that he's also going to be influenced. Hitler is also going to be influenced by Nietzsche, who's influenced by Schopenhauer and Wagner. And Nietzsche came up with the concept of the will to power, which is clearly a transformation somewhat of Schopenhauer's concept of the will. How many of you are familiar with this famous film? For some, it's a cult piece, especially if you're a fascist, which would explain that. this was propaganda, one of the first films developed completely with the goal of being propaganda. It was played all over Germany for all of the audiences that didn't get a chance to come to Nuremberg when it was filmed. Riefenstahl was the name of the producer. I can't remember what her first name is. This is Hitler's plane. And by the way, if you were a German back in the 1930s when this was first showing, you would have never experienced the clouds from this angle before. This was really just absolutely incredible, etc. And of course, it has lots of footage of the crowds all waiting for the arrival of the plane. You have all sorts of folks wondering how many of those were exuberant because they had to be, or, well, you know, if you're in a crowd like that, you get pretty exuberant. They certainly look exuberant. How many of you have seen some of this before? It was like a whole fascist weekend with all sorts of celebrations. And of course, speeches. Of course, today a lot of folks make comparisons between what went on here and what's going on in our society today. Is that rational? Is there any real comparison? Leni Riefenstahl was the producer.
Es gibt keine Revolution als Sauererscheinung, die nicht zur vollkommenen Anarchie führen müsste. So wie die Welt nicht vom Kriegen lebt, so leben die Völker nicht von Revolutionen. Es gibt nichts Großes auf dieser Erde, das Jahrtausende beherrschte und in Jahrzehnten entstanden wäre. Der größte Baum hat auch das längste Wachstum hinter sich.
This was in Nuremberg. By the way, he learned a lot of this sort of stagecraft from his visit to Italy when he visited Mussolini, which is also where the salute came from, although they modified it a little bit. And that was because it was a Roman salute, so the Roman Empire had that salute. He doesn't say "make Germany great again." Well, maybe he does. Etc. So cool. Interesting how it all connects with everything else. But I also want to get into the issue that Roger Scruton brings up. Where am I? Here we go. Is this fun, by the way? You're having fun. And that is the question of kitsch. And in fact, my quiz question for today, if that's going to be fun, I hope, is do you think that the song that had the most votes in our class, that was your favorite love song, which was Taylor Swift's Love Story, would you call that today, would you call that kitsch? Which gets into Roger Scruton's topic here, faking it.
Good morning. And what an absolutely glorious California day it is. Thank you for all coming.
This was at Lutheran University.
2014.
A few years ago, 2014.
International group here from over 12 countries, 29 states. I hope you get to meet one another, and I plan to meet every one of you. Now, I would like, in the course of doing it, and realize that my abstract philosophy, some of which is contained in that little book on beauty, it would be of no use to anyone if it couldn't translate itself into images and personal presentations of the kind that I tried in that film. So today I'm going to come back to some of the philosophical thoughts behind what I was talking about then, and address the whole question of faking, how we get through life by faking, and how faking is sometimes something which is unavoidable and which has a whole artistic tradition behind it. And I think to understand just what it means to be a fake is something which is really important to us in the world in which we live. Because after all, we know that there are occasions when we've got to do it, but we also know that there is a deep need in all of us for the reality, the truth behind the faking, and that's one of the things that we expect art to do for us, to present the human condition in ways that don't falsify, that don't make it into some cheap, sugary version of itself, but actually present the truth.
It makes an interesting distinction between lying and faking it. Lying, obviously, you know what the truth is, for example, of a statement, but you lie to someone. You say that it isn't true, even though you know that it's true. And what you're trying to do is fool that other person. You know, sure, this roof is guaranteed for 25 years, or whatever, and you know that it's a cheap roof and it's only going to be maybe 15 years or something, right? You know, you're lying, right? But faking it, on the other hand, is the kind of thing that even you are taken in by it. You know, so you're faking it in such a way that not only are you fooling other people, but you're fooling yourself as well. So in a sense, I jokingly say, you know, I'm just pretending to be a teacher. I'm not really a teacher. I'm just acting like a teacher. I study up on what, teachers are supposed to do, etc. And then, I come out and I pretend, I wear, what I think of as the professorial kind of, attire. I've got the philosophical looking beard, which is actually just laziness. Although, if you've had pancakes or waffles and you drip syrup in your beard, it can't be that lazy. You've got to get that out of the beard. But when you're faking it, you can even fool yourself. So there are times where I'm absolutely convinced I'm actually a good teacher, even though I actually really know for sure that I'm just pretending. In fact, the whole time I was in the Army, right? I was in the Army for 16 years, 9 months, and 3 days. Although they gave me a full retirement, because of the drawdown and everything. But the whole time I was in the Army, I was faking it. I really wasn't a soldier. I was just pretending. I did all the, stuff. Had the boots shine. The whole business, right? I did all what I was supposed to do, but I was just pretending. Remember, Shakespeare gives us the clue. He says, all the world's a stage, and all of us merely players, with all of our different roles and our entrances and our exits, right? So in a sense, you're playing a role. We're following a story, whether I believe it or not. Of course, the trouble since Hegel is we can't really believe completely the story, which is why Schopenhauer tells us that you can't actually have meaning in life, because while we've no longer have belief in the meta-narratives of the traditions, right? We now know that those are man-made stories that are created for the folks that are in authority to have power over everyone, that believe the story, right? And et cetera, et cetera. So if you no longer believe any of those stories, you no longer have meaning in your life, you no longer have a purpose to go. There was a line in Rogue One. I don't know if you've seen that, one of the latest editions of the Star Wars series, right? Where the one character says to the other that if we don't have belief in our story, the revolution, basically, then there's no point. There's no going on. But as long as we believe in the revolution, then we can do anything, right? That's exactly the same point, right? As long as you believe the story. Of course, it's not true or false. Stories are neither true nor false. They're interpretations of data, and as a result, they're neither true nor false, right? So that's kind of interesting. But there are better or worse stories, right? In 13, I noticed one of the soldiers that was sitting there while in downtime, which wasn't very much, is sitting there reading a book by Joseph Campbell on the power of myth, right? That's one of the books, right? The power of myth, right? As long as you have that story, then you can actually transform the world, right? And all the gods and all the universes are within you, says the character, right? Because they're what you believe, right? Well, if you have a story, remember my one quiz question was, does your belief in a meta-narrative, your meaning in life, enable you to interpret art? And, I would certainly say, well, of course, even if your interpretation of the meaning of life is that there are multiple competing narratives, and, we can try to see which narratives are more powerful than others, and none of them are really true, but they are effective. They are powerful. You can persuade people. Hitler, I feel almost certain he believed his narrative, but also knew that he was constructing the narrative, right? The idea of the Aryan race, going back to the Teutonic traditions to unify the country, make Deutschland über alles, right? You know, etc. Right? You know, that we might ask the same thing. Does Donald Trump believe in his narrative, or is he just using it? Is he constructing that narrative? He clearly had Stephen Breitbart helping him in constructing that narrative, but it's been his narrative in a sense all his life, right? And we'll get to see the latest iteration of his presentation power tonight when he gives the State of the Union, right? We're not going to be able to know if he believes it, but it seems like the more you believe in the story, the more powerfully you can present it, right? The actors that really communicate a role in a show, in a play, in a movie, are the ones who really, and they explain this, right? You become the character. You really have to understand the character. You become the character, and you don't even have to act. Instead, you are that character, right? And that's how you become a great actor. And that's, I think, also how you get elected, you know, that you're clearly representing that narrative, and so on. So I would certainly say that even if there's multiple narratives in conflict, you can certainly look at a piece of art and say things about it, how you would interpret it, and so on. He's absolutely hilarious in this video. I love the one scene where he looks at the screen and it looks like a blank screen, and he points out to the audience, there's actually two colors there, not just one. And they all laugh. Because if you've ever seen some of that art, I've been in plenty of modern art museums, and they are absolutely puzzling. I remember getting yelled at once in the Hirshhorn Museum in D.C. Because I walked into the room, and the guard, who was invisible, was in the room somewhere, said, "Sir, you're in the art." And I had to stand still and try to figure out, what? The room was completely dark. I couldn't see anything. And she said, "Come back this way." So I, of course, headed back to the sound of her voice. Still couldn't see anything. What was the art? So when I walked outside of the room, I read the foot-long explanation, right? And it said, first come in far enough that you're in the dark, and then let your eyes adjust for about 5 minutes, right? So that you can see in the dark, right? And then you'll see the light show that was going on. So basically I had walked right in, and I was standing in the light show because of the darkness, etc. I hadn't let my eyes adjust. Absolutely silly stuff, right? This is a big room in the Hirshhorn with just lights, in kind of the infrared, I guess. But that was enough for me, you know, so I left. I didn't have 5 minutes to read and wait for my eyes to adjust because my wife was in the gift shop. So I had to run through the museum and quick see everything I could, see what was different, and then run down because she didn't even want to go up into the art. She was just in the gift shop. And if you've been in any of the Smithsonian museums, you know those are very expensive museums, so you don't want your wife in there. Oh, is that sexist? I'm sorry. You don't want her in there for too long because it's way expensive. Okay. Some of the stuff is absolutely silly. A little crystal hanging with a light shining on it. You can just see the effect of the light, you know, shining on the wall. You know, what is that? Here, of course, I've already asked. I think I've asked about the vagina out in the lobby, and there's something about that. Even in the way that it fools people, they don't even realize what it is, and yet, if you recognize it, it could be, well, whatever, right? You know, depending on how you react to 8-foot-tall vaginas, right? That's pretty impressive, I think. On the other hand, if you look at the pile of art out on the lawn, the Oppenheim piece, which I think I've already mentioned, right? And you look at Oppenheim's works. And by the way, he refers to, I think it's Kuntz, and the one that he refers to is that it looks like a balloon animal that's sitting in New York, the big red poodle balloon animal. $50 million for that. And he is absolutely appalled by how that piece has been interpreted. That's faking it, he says. Of course, a critique of Roger Scruton is he's defining the difference between kitsch and real art, which is really important because, of course, that's part of our belief in that meta-narrative. I mean, we need those meta-narratives. We need persuasion to believe those so that we have values. Those are also what unify us, etc. By the way, Kwame Appiah has a new book out called The Lies That Bind. Rethinking identity, because of course when we think about who we are, what our place is in the universe, how we maintain that place, that of course ties us into the meta-narratives. Those are what also bind us together. So if we're all believing the same story, that's one of the reasons church is important. You know, everyone that goes to the same church listens to the same narratives professed by the ministry, etc., are going to essentially believe in themselves in the same ways, which unifies us socially with one another. That's, of course, why religions, for example, were considered to be so important by people like Thomas Hobbes and others, right? Religion is your department of state, right? That's what keeps the nation together, essentially. I remember when President George Bush stood in New York at the site of the Twin Towers that had been bombed, and stood there and said, "They're all going to hear us soon," right? And we all just cheered. You know, wow, that was an incredibly unifying narrative for many Americans, not all, right? But the idea that we were united and we were going to get back, you know, at these folks, you know, whoever the heck they were, etc. That's very powerful. Are they lies? Well, they're not truths, right? We're not, you know, in a sense, we're making them up as we go, right? Of course, if you're a believer and someone else says that it's a lie, wow, that's fighting words, right? That's precisely what causes those kinds of internecine kinds of warfares. By the way, there's an interesting book by Vine Deloria. I don't know if you've ever heard of him or not. Wow, I wrote Vibe or something. Vine Deloria, who was the author of quite a few interesting books, but one of them was God is Red, and the race sense of red as. So here's another one, is Custer died for your sins, an Indian manifesto, etc. But God is Red is an interesting analysis of Western philosophy, very well written, great analysis, I think, of Western philosophy, and then points out that the main difference between Western traditions, Western philosophy, and American Indian traditions is that, I don't see where it is. oh, here it is. That native religions are religions that teach individuals in the community how to live in a place, whereas Western religions and the kind of warfare that the West has is over, well, do you believe Jesus is completely God or just mostly God? Mostly God. Well, you're dead then. I'm going to kill you over your interpretation of a metaphysical distinction between, the issues of that sort. Whereas the Indians, they never kill one another over those kinds of differences. They kill one another over other things, but not over metaphysical disputes. Whereas you have the massacre of the Protestants, the Huguenots, etc. The religious wars over disputes of that sort. It might be just a disguise for other things. Like we have flags for the different school colors, and we go out and we have the football game, etc. Okay. Did I cover everything? Kitsch, I should have done a little bit more with that. I did want to ask you, this is one of the other panelists there, Odd Nordland, or Nordland, which one is it? But the thing that gets me, I don't know what that is. Maybe I didn't spell it right. Shit Rock. One of his most famous paintings. Maybe it is Nordland. There it is. What do you think of this? If you think odd, that's an odd name, so it's easy to remember. Nerdrum, that's it. That's a play on a typical picture of the nudes, kind of Renaissance nudes, maybe sitting out naked, obviously, in nature somewhere. But what he has, of course, is quite gross, since all three of these women are taking a shit, right? So you think, wow, can you imagine painting pictures like that? But if you look at his images, they all have a kind of cross between Rembrandt and Caravaggio, is the argument, right? He's a millionaire from all his art. He's quite famous. There's even been a movie made based on one of his paintings. And he's quite intellectual. He's interesting. He's in one of the panel discussions. If you move on from this discussion here and you go on and look for Odd Nordrum, however you say it, Nordrum, you could see the panel discussion between them. And it's quite interesting because Odd professes a kitsch movement, and his paintings he calls kitsch. And to have Roger right there and arguing that kitsch is not art, wow, that's quite interesting for the two of them sitting there. But they cooperate quite well. It was quite interesting. Okay, I'll quit. I gave you the quiz question, right? And so any questions for me? Are we having fun?
What was the quiz question for him?
I don't.
What is the quiz question?
Yeah, what was the quiz question? Anybody remember? Would you call what? Ah, yes, it was the song that was voted by at least 3 people to be their favorite love song was the one by Taylor Swift, Love Story. Would you call that kitsch? Kitsch? Kitsch. SCH, I believe. So odd represents kitsch as a movement. And if you think about it, well, if you don't believe in meta-narratives, if you don't believe there's a purpose in life, one of the things, well, you create a new one, and that is to create art for the sake of creating art, for shocking people, right? For making money, but it's not real. It's not real in the sense that Roger Scruton is looking at the difference between art, real art, has an impact on your emotion in a sense that it's like, wow, powerful stuff, right? Whereas kitsch is just silly. I mean, that picture of 3 women shitting on a rock. I mean, if there's any powerful emotional response in me to that, it's gross, right? Disgusting. That's not, even if it's well done, that's not really the sort of picture I want to have in my mind, right? Nor do I want it hanging on my bathroom wall or, whatever you would do with it. It is shocking. I have to admit, once you see that, you're like, whoa, I'll remember that the rest of my life. Thanks. Yep. Sorry, I'm just doing my job, See you later. Have a good day. Be safe.